First of all, formulas can be used to compute using the cell contents. So in other words, if I want to do math here instead of a calculator, I'm not going to go in and say 2 plus 3 plus 4. That's going to take me a lot of time. I'm also not going to say, okay, what's my cell? I've got B, B2. I'm not going to say B2 plus B3 plus B4. That's going to take me forever. Instead, I know these data points are all in one row. So I'm going to say this equals the sum, and then in a parentheses, starts with B2, put a colon, and B11 is my last data point. Now notice you have to get this right, otherwise you might lose some of your contents. You don't want to do that. And I love Google Sheets. I'm assuming Excel would do something similar, but I love Google Sheets because it also highlights what you're entering, so you can kind of just double check visually. So now I have a sum. I'm actually going to put that over here. Okay, so let's double check. Yep, got my data points. Okay, so that's how you would do math for a sum. You don't have to go individually as long as something's in a straight line. The same would apply if they were across here. Let's say I have 2, 2, 3. I could go in and say equals the sum, and now I'm all on 2, but I've got different columns here. So B2 through G2. So now that's going to calculate it across. I wrote the wrong thing. You can't do G2 because that's the cell I'm in. F2. There you go. Okay, so anyway, that's just how you do simple addition of multiple data points. You are always going to, if you're going to do a formula, you're always going to do equals to indicate that you're doing a formula. So if I just started typing 3 plus 4, that's not going to work. I have to make sure that it starts with equals. That way the cell knows that I'm asking it to do a calculation. So addition, you can just do equals sum, and then in parentheses put what cells you want. To subtract a cell from another cell, it's again pretty intuitive. You just do minus. So if I wanted to subtract this cell from this cell, I could do equals. I can actually just click on it and it'll fill it out for me. Minus that one, and then hit enter, and it's going to do my calculation. Same here, very intuitive. You're just going to do equals. You can hand type what you want, so B2, or you can asterisk for multiply, click on it, and it's going to do your calculation for you. Same with dividing. I could do this by putting in specific numbers, which I am going to do at one point during our standard deviation. Just be sure that if you do enter in your own numbers, that if you're using these same cells to do a new similar calculation with different data points, just be sure that you are making sure that all the numbers you entered manually are being updated. So in other words, if I made a formula for over here, but instead of entering in the cell number, I entered in the actual number. So instead of doing, B2 plus B3, I actually put the number 3. Oops. And then let's say, oh, I have this new data set and I'm entering new data and I'm like, okay, 3, 6, 5, this is all my new data points. This is not going to change because I have now entered B2 plus 3, and it's not actually pulling my B3, it's pulling the literal number that I typed in. So be careful with that if you're going to reuse cells for a new calculation, which I will be doing. Okay, so the number one problem in our homework is finding the standard deviation, and it's really breaking it down into each step. The number 2 is going to be doing the same thing, but you're going to have to remember how to do it yourself. So the first step is going to be finding the mean of all data points. So that's the sum of all your data points divided by the number of data points that you have. So for this data that we're seeing are just average amounts of books that a student carries. these are my data points. I've got one student that has 3 books, one student has 6 books, etc., etc. So my first step is going to be finding the mean of these data points. So I need to add these together. So I'm going to say equals sum, parentheses, B2. I'm not going to put B1 because that's where my title is. B2 to B11. That is the sum of my data points. And I'm just going to write that over here so that I don't forget what that is. Okay. So I've got my sum of data points, and now what's my next step? I need to divide that by the number of data points to find my mean. So 58, I'm not going to write 58, I'm going to use my cell contents in case I want to reuse this later. So I got my sum. To find my mean, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, divided by 10 because I have 10 data points. Okay, that's my mean. So here's my mean. I've now found step 1 of this problem. That's done. Okay, step 2. I'm going to subtract the mean from each data point to find the deviation. Okay, so I'm going to write, this column is just going to have my mean. I'm going to select all of these because it needs to be all side by side so it can compute. Okay, what did I do wrong here? I copied this formula instead of the value. So I'm going to actually write the value, 5.8, and I'm going to copy that and paste that. Okay, so now we've got our mean. Step 2 is subtracting the mean from the data point. So over here, I'm going to find the difference. I'm going to subtract this from this, so equals data point minus mean. Okay, and now I can actually drag this down and it's going to calculate it each. And I can make sure that it's being smart and changing each formula by clicking on it. So I can see like this truly does equal this minus this. It's smart and it kind of sees that it picks up on the pattern that you're going for. Okay, so this is the difference of each data point. This is 3 minus 5.8. This is 6 minus 5.8. So we've got step 2 completed. We have subtracted the mean from each data point. Our next step is going to be to square each individual data point, or not data point, but the difference, the variation. So basically what we're finding is that this data point is 2.8 away from average. We're seeing that it's less than average. So now we're going to find the squares of the deviation. I apologize if I'm using wrong terminology. I think I'm using the right terminology. Okay, so to find the squares, this is the deviation. It's not the standard deviation, it's just the deviation of this data point. This is the deviation, this is the square of the deviation. How would we find the square? We multiply, negative 2.8 times negative 2.8. But if I want to use this in the future, I want to write a formula. I don't want to write negative 2.8 times negative 2.8. That way I can reuse it because this might not be the data point in my next calculation. So I'm going to write equals this, d2 times itself. Now I have a square. And I can just fill that all in. And I can see, okay, is that truly the square? Yep, I can check my work, make sure those are all calculating right. I have the square of each variation. Now our next step is to add the squared variations, because we're trying to find the standard deviation, the average of all the deviations. So we're going to add these all together by typing equals sum. You can drag that, or you could type it manually, E2 to E11. That's our sum. Something to look out for here is if you don't have your settings on your sheet right, it could be rounding for you, and that can affect your answer. So I'm actually going to take all of these and I'm going to change how it's formatting my numbers by going to Format, Number, Custom Number Format. I personally would like to have 6 0 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so now I've got a little bit more of a precise number. Okay, so I see that my sum E2 to E11 is 29.6000. So I've added, I'm going to write sum of deviations. Okay, so this is my sum of deviations. Now we're going to implement the formula for standard deviation, which is going to be similar to this. This is not quite right. This is for the population. We're trying to find it from the, what's the word? Sample. So we're going to actually do n minus 1. Let's see if I can get the right formula. Yeah, here we go. We're going to find the standard deviation, which is this right here. This up top is what we just did. So we've got all of these numbers. I'm going to see if I can kind of, So we've got this formula here, and this is what we're operating with. So ultimately, we're going to try to find the standard deviation. These homework problems are trying to get us to go through step by step. Okay, where do these numbers go? So the numerator is going to be this number here. It is the sum of every data point's deviation squared. So we found each deviation, we squared each deviation, now we're adding them all together. That is our numerator in this formula. Our denominator in this formula is going to be the number of data points that we have. We have 10 data points, and we're going to subtract 1. So we can say we have 10 data points. N minus 1 is going to be 9 data points. Okay, so we see we have the numerator, 29.6, denominator is 9. So we're going to go ahead and calculate that by saying sum of deviation. It would help if I started my formula. Equals sum of deviation divided by the number minus 1. And that is not our standard deviation because we still have to find the square root. If there's a function to find the square root, I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to use square root calculator. I'm going to say, okay, my variance is 3.2888888. Find the square root of 3.2888. And I see that my answer, if I were to round it, this is a 2, so this is going to stay a 5, is 1.8135 rounded to 4 decimal points. And that is my standard deviation. 18135. 18135. Okay. So if you were using the data points from the homework, that would be exactly how you calculate it. Now, let's say you're moving on to the next problem. Well, this was kind of a lot of work, so I don't really want to rewrite all of my formulas. I know these are my data points. I know these are my means. I know these are my deviations and my squares of deviations. And I know that this is a hand input number, and this is a hand input number, so I'm going to have to make sure that I actually update those numbers. So let's say I have new data points. Let's say I now have how much money people are making in a week. Let's say a lot of them are making $500, some are making 100, some are making 25, some are making 60, and let's say I actually only have this many data points. So I'm going to delete those because I only have this many data points. Now let's double check. Do I have the sum? These are empty, so I can actually leave this alone. I don't have to update the formula because these are empty, so it's not adding anything because there's nothing there. But I could update it if I wanted to be just through B7. The mean is, again, this is a handwritten number, so I'm going to have to make sure I update this. the mean is the sum of the data points divided by the number of data points. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data points. Got to find the new mean. Now, I don't want to forget, I have to update this mean. We're working at the new mean now. So I can't just assume, oh, I put in my new data points, now I've got all my deviations and I can find my standard deviation. No. I have my new mean. I have to make sure I put in that new mean. 280.83. Alternatively, if I know this column, if I know this cell is always going to contain my mean, I could also make this equal this cell. But if I drag this down, these are now empty. That didn't work. Why is that? Because it's assuming that I'm wanting to continue this pattern of following down. So see, it says it equals B14. It's assuming I want to equal B15. It's assuming I want to equal B15. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say it equals B14 as well. And then I'm going to take both of these to show what the pattern I actually want. And it's not working. That normally works. I don't know. I won't spend more time on that. So I'm just going to handwrite it. Okay. I've got, and remember you can't leave some of them blank because then it's going to be subtracting from 0 and then it's not, these computations are not going to be right. So you've got your mean equal with all your data points. Now what is it finding over here? That was step 2. We're subtracting the mean from each data point. So this is the deviation. And sometimes it helps every once in a while to make sure things make logical sense. Okay, so does it make sense that this is the average? Yes, it makes sense that between people who are making $60 and $25 and then $500, that the average would be around 280. So that makes sense. Our deviation, does it make sense that 500,000 deviates from the mean by that much? Yes, it does make sense because it adds up to be $500. Okay, so we've got our deviations. Our next step is to square each deviation, not variation. And once again, we already have this computing for us because we used the cell rather than the number. So we have our new deviations, these are all updated, and we have our new squares of the deviations because these are all updated. It's all computing for us. We've got our squares of our deviations. Then we're finding our sum, that's step 4. The sum of these deviations. Once again, these are empty. I don't need to update my formula, but I'm going to just to make it cleaner. That is our sum of deviations. That's not the end. We still have the step of this formula. So this is our sum of our deviations. This up here is our sum of deviations. We now need to find n. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got n is 6. N minus 1 is therefore 5 because 6 minus 1 is 5. So now we have our components of our fraction. We've got 291,020 on top. We've got 5 on the bottom. We're going to do that computation by saying, this is actually already populating for us because again, we didn't handwrite our numbers. We've got this cell divided by this cell. Sum of the deviations divided by n minus 1. That's computing for us. Then this is a handwritten one because I don't know how to find the square root on a sheet. So I'm just going to go to my square root calculator and say, okay, here's our variance. It's 5,000. I'm just going to round. It's 58,204. Figure that out. 58,204. Is that right? And I'm going to round again, so I'm just going to say our standard deviation is 241. Okay, so basically that's how you're going to find your standard deviation, is following all of these steps.